And Kelly-Ann joins me now, along with Mark Ballard from the National Deaf Children's Society, and Rachel O'Neill, who's a senior lecturer in deaf education at Edinburgh University and a former teacher of the deaf. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, Kelly-Ann, of course, you're passionate about all the stories you cover as a reporter and a presenter, but this is personal for you.
Yeah, it is. This is a matter very close to my heart. I've got two little boys, Mikey and Daniel, my absolute world. And Daniel was born with severe hearing loss, so he's had hearing aids since he was a baby, and he has a teacher of the deaf. So I can see firsthand, and I've seen firsthand over the last 6 years, just how much work these teachers of the deaf do. They really provide that extra layer of support, so yeah.
And was he diagnosed very early on?
Daniel was diagnosed when he was 4 weeks old. We did have an inkling, I have to say, very early on though, because when he was born, he did go through the newborn hearing screening test, which all babies get when they're in the hospital. So the day he was born, they did the test, the result came back unclear. We didn't think too much of it at that point. We thought, oh, you know, it was a speedy delivery, something in his ears, we'll be fine. Went back the following week, still an unclear result. And we did notice in the house, he wasn't really responding to a lot of things. We took him out to my husband's graduation at 5 days old, and he didn't respond to the bagpipes. And we did think, something's the matter. So he was booked in for a full hearing test at 4 weeks old. And to do a hearing test on a baby, it's, I was holding him, and they put a little earpiece into his ear, and they play different sounds at different frequencies, and a computer records that sound, and there's little sensors on his head. So we were holding him, and it takes quite a long time. It takes a good few hours, and they tested his left ear first. And after about 40 minutes, they told us he was severe to profound in that ear. We were devastated. But the other ear came back moderate to severe. Yeah, so he's got a bit of hearing. And we were so lucky to get that early diagnosis, which meant he got hearing aids quickly.
It sounds like it must have been really, really difficult, but we can hear from Kelly-Ann's report, from her own experience, how important teachers of the deaf are, Mark.
Exactly. We know that deaf children like Tommy, Lillian and Megan can achieve just as much as their hearing friends and classmates if they get the right support. That the parents of deaf children who are members of the National Deaf Children's Society tell us about the amazing work that teachers of the deaf do from the very earliest years until deaf children transition to adulthood. That's why it's so important that the Scottish Government and local authorities step up and address the dramatic fall in numbers. And
we will come back to that in just a second, but what do you need to do to become a teacher of the deaf, and what's the motivation? Because you don't get paid any more in Scotland. You do down south, but not here.
That's right. I think the motivation for many teachers is, like we saw Amanda on the programme, is the interest in the job, the varied job, that you might start working with a family in their home, and you might go into different classrooms, and then you might transition with the young person to move them on to college. So it's a varied job. It's an interesting job because you might be working one moment with sign language users and the next moment with children who use speech. It's a stimulating job, I think you could say.
And really rewarding, I'm sure. And Mark, you mentioned the drop-off in numbers here. What is your concern about what's going to happen going forward if this isn't addressed?
We heard from the deaf children in the package about the way that when they've got an issue, having a teacher of the deaf available for them to talk to address a hearing aid that doesn't work, or a class that they're finding difficult, or a teacher who's not sure how to teach deaf children. You need that one-to-one support. If numbers fall so that there's only a few teachers of the deaf in each local authority, they won't be able to do that. They won't be there for deaf children and young people. And deaf children have got a right to that kind of support.
And as a parent, are you worried about what might happen, Kelly-Ann?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people think because your child has a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, they think, well, they're in a mainstream school, they can hear just fine. Yes, it's wonderful that technology is there and that they can hear with this technology, but it's still not the same. They still need that extra bit of support, and that's what a teacher of the deaf does. So yeah, I am concerned.
And you were both talking earlier about the fact that since these tests are so successful, I mean, my kids didn't have them because they're much older, but they're so successful, children are getting these implants, that local authorities almost feel that they don't need as many teachers now. Is this a concern of yours,
Well, it could be one reason for the drop. that local authorities don't always have someone to talk to about deaf education, and they may rely on their general knowledge, which is inaccurate. Cochlear implants aren't magic. They require a lot of work, and in many cases they're not as successful as people had hoped.
Sometimes they don't work at all.
No, occasionally they don't work at all. And I think that teachers of deaf children need a very wide range of skills, and in some authorities they're only using a little bit of that. They're only doing hearing aid checks, but really the children need more time.
Okay.
That's why we need the numbers.
Well, we asked the Education Secretary, Jenny Gilruth, and someone from COSLA, the voice of local government, to come on, but they declined our invitation. They sent statements, though, and the COSLA one says, decisions about the teaching and school workforce are made at a local authority level based on the needs of their communities. Nationally, the figures for all school staff, and that includes, all the support staff, etc., have increased markedly since 2018. The Scottish Government says education authorities have a duty to identify, provide and review the additional support needs of these pupils, including those affected by deafness. So, what needs to be done to rectify this, Mark?
That's really not good enough from the Scottish Government and from COSLA. It's not enough for the Scottish Government to say this is a local authority problem. Local authorities are often simply hiring teachers of the deaf from other local authorities. The problem is overall numbers in Scotland. We need the Scottish Government and COSLA to step up and work together and get more people into the profession, get more young teachers of the deaf who are going to train other teachers in the local authority who are going to be there for deaf children in the long run. It's not good enough to simply pass the buck between COSLA and the Scottish Government.
Do you feel that there's a lot of buck passing, Rachel?
Yes, it is compulsory for teachers of deaf children to have this postgraduate qualification. It's a lot of work to get it, but the councils do pay the fees, which is good, but they're not really sending enough teachers, and especially some authorities have very few teachers of the deaf, which means that their children are not getting the right level of support. So I think COSLA and the government need to get together.
And do you think there needs to be a Scotland-wide approach? Because the moment it's up to each local authority, isn't it?
There needs to be a Scotland-wide approach because across the board, teachers of the deaf in Scotland don't get the kind of salary uplift that teachers of the deaf in England do. Teachers of the deaf in England often earn £4,000 more than they would do as a standard classroom teacher, giving you an incentive to do all that training and stay in the profession. There's no progression often for teachers of the deaf in Scotland. So we need the ability for teachers to do a 1-year or a 2-year full-time course rather than doing it part-time alongside their other teaching responsibilities. That will all take central action from the government, working with the University of Edinburgh and the local authorities to put in place a proper workforce plan to turn around this massive decline in teachers of the deaf.
Because it is a lot of work training to become one of these teachers, isn't it?
Yes.
So when people are training to do it, do they need more support? Because you were saying earlier to me that they're already doing this job and they're training as well.
Yes, it's hard work. It's a postgraduate diploma, so that's about 2/3 of a master's. They work full-time, most of them, and often got other responsibilities. It's quite a pressure, and they have to pass it at master's level. So that's a pressure too, because otherwise the council might redeploy them from the job they like to do. So it is a very big pressure for them. They do really well, but we do need more of them. And I think Mark's ideas are sensible. Some scholarships and also some minimum standards. Like your son has had really good early support. That's not true all over Scotland. We need some minimum standards around early support.
So you've had plenty of support then, Kelly?
Yeah, I think we've been very lucky actually. Daniel got an early diagnosis, and when we lived in one local authority, he was seen as teacher of the deaf 2 to 3 times a week. We've moved to a different house and we are in a different local authority, and he's still getting fantastic support. He sees his teacher of the deaf twice a week and he's doing fantastic. He's got a great class teacher who's very aware of all the technology he uses, and he sees his teacher of the deaf regularly. She's working wonders with him and his speech is great. He's a little chatterbox, I have to say. We take him to the cinema.
Like mother, like son.
We take him to the cinema and he yaps the whole way, and his big brother's like, Daniel, I want to hear this. So he's doing fantastic.
So it is important that we try and close this attainment gap, because not enough of deaf children are going to university, and that's a problem.
that's a huge problem. We heard in the package from Megan, whose deafness wasn't identified until she was 8 years old, despite the fact that her parents were worried about the fact that she wasn't hearing in the way that her older siblings were. We need to make sure every child gets that early support when they need it, and that will be the key to making sure that deaf children don't fall behind their classmates.
And you want Daniel to go to university. Your ambitions will be as huge for him as they are for Mikey.
Yeah, I mean, I just want my boys to be happy and healthy, and you know what? They're both thriving, and Daniel's doing fantastic.
I'm disgusted you couldn't bring them both in, but we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And that's all from Scotland Tonight. Thanks for watching. Good night.